The New York Mets stunned the Atlanta Braves on Monday night, beating them by a score of 10-4. Who saw that coming? We'll talk about it on today's edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Enter the promo code LOCKEDONMLB or go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB to get a free white tech hat with every order. Now, Monday night was a glorious night for Mets fans. It's likely a meaningless game. Braves, it's not going to impact their season. The Mets, probably not either. But to see this Mets team, the one that started DJ Stewart, Rafael Ortega, and Jonathan Arauz, somehow put up 10 runs and beat the Braves in a game where David Peterson started. Because if you would have told me the Mets scored 10 runs in the first game in their series in Atlanta, I'd say, oh, did they lose 12-10? Because that's been the story with these two teams. But for a night, Mets fans got to just watch something that they haven't seen in a long time, which is the Mets beating up the Braves in Atlanta. And it was amazing to see. And it started with DJ Stewart and Rafael Ortega hitting home runs. Now, Stewart, we've come to expect that. He's been great lately. So he hits a homer, solo shot, no surprise there. Ortega has not homered in a Mets uniform yet. He hits a 2-run shot. The Mets are up 3-0. Now, I will say Alan Winans, gave the Mets some cookies there. It was an absolute hanger to Stewart. I think Ortega's was a fastball in. Regardless, you still have to put barrel on ball, and the Mets did that. But it felt very much like for a fleeting second, the Mets had a chance, and then the Braves were just going to take command of the game because David Peterson coughed up that lead. He gave home runs to Marcell Ozuna in the second and the fourth inning, both solo shots. And then in the middle there in the third inning, he gives up a 2-run double to Michael Harris. And when Ozuna hit that home run in the fourth, suddenly the lead was completely gone. The Mets were trailing 4-3. But even with that, I think David Peterson pitched pretty well considering the bar he set for himself. He struck out Matt Olson twice, one of them being with Harris standing on second base in that third inning. He also struck out Austin Riley to get out of that jam. There was 2 runners on for Ronald Acuna Jr. in the fourth inning, and he got a big strikeout on Acuna to get out of that inning. And he pitched into the fifth inning for the first time since getting inserted back into the rotation. They wisely removed him before he could face Ozuna for a third time. But 4 2/3, 7 hits, 4 earned, but 4 strikeouts. Kind of a good start for Peterson. The story of the game, though, is the offense, okay? Because prior to Peterson getting removed in the bottom of the fifth, the Mets gave him a lead, and it was just a barrage of singles, okay? You had Brandon Nimmo draws a walk with 1 out, then Lindor, McNeil, each single. Nimmo scores on McNeil's hit, then Alonso drives in Lindor with a base hit, Vogelback drives in McNeil with a base hit, and then DJ Stewart lays down the perfect safety squeeze bunt that scores Alonso. All of a sudden, the Mets put up a 4 spot and are winning 7-4. Then, next inning, the Mets were able to keep the Braves off the board. Francisco Lindor just breaks the game wide open, hits a 3-run homer, his 23rd of the season. I'm going to be writing a full article on Francisco Lindor tomorrow, and it'll be a part of the podcast for Wednesday because this guy deserves some respect. He has been amazing for a few months now, and his season overall is maybe the best of any shortstop in baseball, which is still not the recognition he gets, particularly for Mets fans, which is just a shame because this guy is clearly a great guy to build your franchise around for the next decade. I don't care what any of his haters tell you. He has just been great the last couple seasons. So another big testament to him for hitting that home run in that spot. And it was a great at bat too. He's had Nothing but great at bats lately. Now, Phil Bickford got the last out of that 5th inning. He struck out Ozuna, and then he stayed on for the 6th and gets a couple more strikeouts. So he gets 4 outs, 3 of them via strikeouts. And if I told you on August 1st, when the Mets made a trade to acquire Bickford, the 11th hour of the deadline, they just basically took some pitchers that the Dodgers were clearing from their 40-man roster. And I told you that Phil Bickford would be pitching better than David Robertson in August. Who would have thought that would be the case? But that's what's happened because baseball is super weird. Now, Sam Coonrod also has been really good for the Mets. He pitched a scoreless 7th, his 4th scoreless appearance in a row, and they got an inning from both Adam Ottavino and Drew Smith to close out that game. But you look at the title of the episode today. This one win against the Braves means more than everything the Mets did the past week here. The reason why I feel that way is because obviously the rivalry and all that. And yeah, sure, the Braves could shellac them in the final 2 games of this series. And you say, oh, it's another series loss. It means nothing. To me, it's a testament to the fact that this is a Mets team that is no longer in their heads. They're playing carefree finally. I think there was a period of mourning after the deadline of realizing that the season, for all intents and purposes, was over. And then you see all of these, it's almost like scab players in a strike that fill out the roster. And it's just like, okay, what are we watching? My episode, not this Monday, but the previous Monday, was the Mets are unwatchable right now because they were. But last week they played good baseball. And I chalk that up to beating bad baseball teams. It's the first time the Mets had done that, but still, it was nice to see. And I think maybe I should have given them a little more credit in the sense that this has been such a bad year when it comes to winning series. If you look at the 101 win team from last year, what did they consistently do? They just found a way to win series. Well, this year, you know how many times the Mets have won consecutive series? You can't even use a full hand to count. Okay, they started the year great. Okay, there was a stretch where they won 4 series in a row. That was part of where they were 14 and 7 in their first 21 games. But then they go on a tailspin where they lost 9 of 11 and were basically never the same ever since. The last time prior to last week where the Mets had won 2 consecutive series, it was when they opened up July with a 6-game winning streak. Win a couple of series there. I believe Giants, Diamondbacks, but I didn't include that in my notes, but that's off the top of my head, I think. And they won the first game of their series against the Padres. Now, problem was they lost the final 2 games of their series against the Padres, heading into the break, and sort of killed that momentum. Outside of that, you have to go back to May when the Mets beat the Rays in the series and swept the Guardians. Other than that, those are the only 3 instances this year where the Mets have won consecutive series before this past week where they beat the Pirates and the Cardinals. Now you win 1 against the Braves. And like I said, that could be the only game they win in Atlanta. But for a night, for a day as you're driving to work, you could say, hey, maybe the Mets are playing some good ball. And especially when you look at the backdrop of Mets versus Braves lately. Because this year the Mets are 2-8 against the Braves, or they were prior to tonight's win. Now they're 3-8. In Atlanta this year, they got swept in their first series against the Braves. If you go back to last year, they've lost 9 of their last 10 games playing in Atlanta. They got swept in that pivotal series that decided the division at the end of the year in 2022. And then there was a 4-game series in August against the Braves where they lost 3 of 4. And those were the last 7 games they played against the Braves. So they lost 6 of 7 to close out their season against the Braves. And, they had that season series in hand, and then they lost the tiebreaker at the end. And then this year, we've seen the story of these 2 different teams, how they've gone in completely different directions. If you go back to June of last year, the Atlanta Braves are 158-78. That's a 669 winning percentage in the regular season over 200 plus games. It's ridiculous. They have been, since June of last year, the best team in the National League. The Mets were as big of an underdog to even win a game in this series. So to see them steal a game for the Braves and actually be in position to steal a series, to me, that's more significant than winning 5 of 7 last week. And we'll see if they can make something of it over the next couple of days. And I'll tell you a reason for optimism for that, because this lineup seems to have finally found their footing. And I want to go through that in the next segment. Before we do, though, today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs make you look good with their stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. And with those khaki shorts, you can wear them anywhere. You can wear them on the golf course, wear them out to dinner, wear them to church. And you know what? You won't even mind wearing them around the house because they are that comfortable. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of the stiff, restricting cotton. And Bird Dogs fix this issue by reinventing their cloud knit fabric that looks like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. They also added their anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. So if you want to try these incredibly comfortable shorts, go to birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB or enter the promo code LockedOnMLB, and you're going to get a free white tech cat with every order. That's birddogs.com/LockedOnMLB, promo code LockedOnMLB for a free white tech cat. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you that. The New York Mets play Atlanta Braves again at 7:20 Eastern Time tonight. Catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. I would not at all say the Mets are back into the playoff mix, but if they win this series against the Braves, I will start to entertain it. So I just want to go through, for one, how hard it's still going to be, but where there's a little bit of optimism. So we'll start with the wild card update. We haven't done this in a while because there's been no reason to. But the Mets are sitting at 6.5 games out. If they can get within 5 when they play the Diamondbacks, the Reds, the Marlins, the Phillies, maybe you have a miraculous run in you. I still really want Mets fans to reserve their optimism to not necessarily buy in just yet. But this is what happens when you win 7 out of 10 games and you beat the Braves. You start to have these discussions. But the playoff picture, it's pretty out of hand. The Phillies, they're running away with the top spot. They're 3 games up of the Giants, who are in that third spot, 2.5 games up of the Cubs. The Diamondbacks are a half game behind the Giants. The Reds game out, Marlins game and a half, and then the Padres are sitting at 5.5 games out before you get to the Mets. So a lot of teams they would have to jump. There are 5 teams within 2 games of each other for the second and third wild card spots, with the Phillies sort of taking that top spot and running with it. The thing is, a lot of these teams are playing each other. Like the Padres are playing the Marlins right now. So, there is a chance that these teams beat up on each other. If the Mets can find a way to make it through their gauntlet over the next 11 more games they have with the Braves, the Angels are a little bit of a softer part of that schedule with how they played lately, but they still have Ohtani, and I think Trout's going to be back on Citi Field. Then you have the I don't know if it's the Rangers or Mariners first, but you do play those 2 AL powerhouses. And that'll probably knock you down a peg or 2 and probably knock you out of the race entirely. But if the Mets can win a series against the Braves, anything can happen. And how would they win one? Well, I'll tell you, it's because the offense is suddenly good, and it's not completely stunning for the offense to be good because it's guys that were supposed to perform all season long. Lindor, I already mentioned. Tomorrow's show is going to be all about him. He's been great. And these stats are taken over the last 15 days, so basically the last couple of weeks here. Lindor's hitting 352, 397 on base, 463 slug. He's got an 860 OPS. It's good, right? Jeff McNeil has been awesome over the last 15 games played. 361 average, 394 on base, 508 slug, has a couple of home runs, 3 doubles, 10 RBIs, 12 runs scored, 902 OPS. The Mets had this version of Jeff McNeil all year. It would have been a completely different season, but he's finally hitting like Jeff McNeil. And if you have Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor in this lineup producing, that's really going to stir up a lot of traffic on the bases, and they're going to be able to drive in some runs themselves. Brandon Nimmo's been awesome lately too. He's got 3 home runs over his last 14 games played. He has 20 hits and 55 at-bats. He's hitting 364, 453 on base, 564 slug. He's got an OPS over 1,000. He's been a huge boost to this team, and you're seeing a foursome atop this lineup that is performing the way they did to win 101 games last year. And it's been Nimmo to Lindor to McNeil, and then Pete Alonso has been anchoring it with 8 home runs over the last couple of weeks. He's in 269, 415 on base, 769 slug. It's 11 walks to 16 strikeouts. The OPS getting close to 1,200. He's been amazing. And then you have DJ Stewart, who's suddenly been a really nice fifth wheel in that, or a sixth wheel, depending on the day, if Daniel Vogelback's in the lineup. But you got Stewart over his last 11 games played with 5 home runs and 28 at-bats. He's hitting 286, 333 on base with an 821 slug. So he's got an OPS over 1,000. So now you got 5 hitters that you look at in the lineup and say, okay, they're giving you good at-bats. And then Daniel Vogelback has been pretty solid too. He's getting on base at a 357 clip, 486 slug. He's hit 3 home runs over his last 35 plate appearances. He's got an 843 OPS. And then on top of it, the one thing I will say about the I don't know if scab players is too rough to call them that, but I mean, what do you call Jonathan Arauz and Rafael Ortega? That's what it feels like. It's just guys that aren't supposed to be playing on your big league team, but here they are. You know what? They give you some pretty decent defense, if nothing else, particularly Arauz. That's the one thing he's given the Mets is a pretty good glove over at third base, better than they've certainly gotten this year from Brett Beatty and Eduardo Escobar. So, that's been a nice thing. And Danny Mendick has been solid when they've played him defensively as well. And Ortega, to his credit, over his last 15 games played, he has been hitting pretty well. 277 average, 346 on base. Not much slug there until tonight with the home run, but a 708 OPS, not bad. So there's some lineup continuity that's finally working. And then in the bullpen, they're getting a lot more than you'd expect from Phil Bickford and Sam Coonrod. And, if you get Adam Ottavino and Drew Smith and Brooks Raley pitching alongside those guys, like the bullpen has been a little bit shored up as well, better than it's looked in a while with worse names. But again, I think part of it is you get to the point with the guys that are playing right now where they're not playing with any pressure. They went into Atlanta, and I think in the past, the Mets would be in their head about, oh, this is our biggest rival. We got to come up for this performance. We got to, arrive. We got to show out and prove that we can hang with them. In this game, you're playing carefree, and you have DJ Stewart and Rafael Ortega give you 3 runs early in the game on a couple of home runs, and maybe everyone plays looser, and the Mets were able to steal one. So it's not to say that, hey, this team's suddenly going to go on a run. But I do think if you haven't been watching, you can tune back in and catch the Mets games because the product has gotten a lot better, and hopefully that continues. And they give you another couple good weeks of baseball, and then if they pull off a crazy run where they can win, 3 of these next 4 series and get into the fringe of this race, maybe we'll be in for a fun month of September when it's all said and done. But in the final segment today, there is still a player that needs to be called up to at least give fans one other thing to tune into. There's no more excuses. Ronny Mauricio needs to be part of the big league club. We're going to talk about it in the next segment. First, though, another word from our sponsors. The New York Mets play the Atlanta Braves at 7:20 Eastern time tonight. Catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast. SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets. There's no excuses anymore. The New York Mets have to promote Ronny Mauricio. There was a date that had to pass for the Mets to promote Mauricio where he would maintain his rookie status going into next season. That has come and gone, and we've seen around baseball, top prospects are getting called up. Noelvi Marte for the Reds gets the call. The Yankees call up, was Everson Pereira. They've called up some of their top prospects and got them up to the big leagues. And it's important because if you have a player that wins Rookie of the Year, there's now some compensation that's tied to it. I think it's draft pick compensation. So it made sense to hold him out, I guess, for that. With that said, you're running out Jonathan Arauz every day. Jonathan Arauz is not part of the Mets future. He's 25 years old. He has been passed around a bunch. He's a journeyman type guy. You don't need to see him. And even though his defense is probably better than you're going to get from Ronny Mauricio at third base, who cares? Arauz has now played 15 games with the Mets, and he started their last 8. He's hitting 116, 208 on base, 256 slug. He has hit 2 home runs, which has been impressive. But other than that, it's 3 singles and 43 at-bats. So 5 hits and 43 at-bats. and he struck out 14 times, has only walked 5 times. He's not giving you quality at bats. And I'm not saying the Mets need to call up Ronny Mauricio to go for it this year. What I'm saying is they're wasting at bats on this guy, Arauz. And even Danny Mendick. I mean, Danny Mendick has not been good over his last 2 weeks. He's in 208, 240 on base, 333 slug. He has 1 home run, 573 OPS. He's been bad too. And these are the guys that are getting starts in the infield when Ronny Mauricio is just wasting away in AAA. You want to see what he does when he gets in front of the bright lights in the big league stadiums on the grand stage. And he has the type of alpha personality from what I've seen of him that he might play over his head a bit in the big leagues and be more of an Alvarez than a Beatty. And if you're all about 2024 and you're all about turning the page, and that's what the deadline was about. That's why you made the trades that you did. You brought in great talent to your farm system to hopefully be able to shore up the 2024 roster with prospects a bit so that, your free agent shopping is, targeted in a different area and it's, not plugging a million holes. You're trying to find a way to extend your window, create a new one with these Acuñas of the world, the Drew Gilbert, Ryan Clifford. You really just lengthen out the farm system. It's all about the future. If that is the motive of the franchise, I don't understand how you can't have Mauricio in the big leagues right now to get some work. Have Mike Vassell make some starts. You can learn some things that will help when it comes to putting your roster together next season. And the argument for keeping Brett Beatty in AAA is far greater at this point than Ronny Mauricio. You keep Brett Beatty in AAA, you get an extra year of service time. I get that. I get why you don't pull that trigger and bring him back, no matter how well he hits. And it could be cruel, but business is a cruel thing, particularly the business in sports. And sorry, Brett, you should have hit better when you're with the big league club. Like, I'm actually on board the franchise with that. I really am. But Ronny Mauricio, why not? Call him up, play him every day at third base instead of Arauz. You still have your days with Mendick at second, McNeil at second, whatever it is. If you want to even keep, improving his positional flexibility and start him around the infield, you can do that. I wouldn't take starts away from Lindor, but you could DH Lindor a little bit, I guess, right? So you could DH Lindor, play Mauricio at shortstop a game or two a week. So you do the exact same thing if you wanted to. You could play him 2 games at third, 2 games at short, 2 games at second, and rest him a day if you really wanted to. Or you could just stick him at third base and see how he holds up. And maybe you're going to the offseason and thinking, wow, man, Ronny Mauricio, he hit 290 in the final 5 weeks of the season or 6 weeks of the season, whatever we have left here, and played some decent defense at third base. Brett Beatty's got some competition. The Mets would be really smart to make this move. And you got a day off on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. And then you return home for a big series against the Angels because Ohtani's coming to town. And you got the Kodai Senga giveaway. There's a lot there. And we'll be going through that in the final couple shows this week. But add a little bit more excitement to it by giving Mets fans the announcement on Thursday that Ronny Mauricio is coming up to the big leagues, and have some hype going into that game. Try to fill out the ballpark as much as you can for Ohtani, for Mauricio, everything else. And, see what the kid has over the final month plus of this season. So the time is now for Ronny Mauricio. I just hope the Mets don't waste it any longer. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. For all you everydayers, tomorrow's show, it's going to be about putting some respect on Francisco Lindor's name. So make sure you check that out. Follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Follow me on Twitter, Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. If you want to catch every pitch of the Mets hometown broadcast this week, you can do so with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Mets.